along. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today on our webinar and another one in the series of the Let's Talk MPT series. Today's topic is public-private partnerships to advance MPT development. We have participants from different time zones, and we are so thrilled to have you all with us today. Please enter your name, your location, so that if you want, you can connect your affiliations. Just a few housekeeping notes. All participants will be muted during the presentations and the discussions. Your questions are important to us, and we'll address them during the Q&A. When we do reach the Q&A portion, please feel free to raise your hand, virtual or real. And remember to mute yourself again afterwards, just to ignore or avoid any background noise. So I'll just quickly run through the agenda. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Claudia van Wyk. I'm the project coordinator today, guiding you through the introductory slides, and following that we'll have presentations from our phenomenal presenters. I'll give more background on them in a moment. We'll be hearing their insights over the next 25 minutes, and I really hope you are just as excited as I am today. After the presentations, Bethany and I will facilitate the discussion, and it'll be an excellent opportunity for everyone to engage in meaningful dialogue. Finally, we'll open the floor for the Q&A session, so please have your questions ready. We are looking forward to a productive and yet another engaging session with all of you. So just a quick background, the initiative for MPTs or IMPT has been a cornerstone in the global effort to advance multipurpose prevention technologies since its launch in 2009. Since launching the IMPT consists of nearly 2,000 stakeholders from nearly 24 countries. This unique initiative acts as a neutral platform, bringing together stakeholders from various backgrounds to offer essential technical guidance and strategic direction. By uniting diverse voices, the IMPT tirelessly works to push forward the development of MPTs, which are crucial for HIV prevention and sexual reproductive health. In 2020, recognizing a need for ongoing dialogue, the IMPT produced the Let's Talk MPTs webinar series. The series has successfully gathered global experts to discuss research and development priorities, and also fostered collaboration and networking among leading figures in the field. As we dig deeper into today's session, remember that these efforts are paving the way for innovative solutions in sexual health and prevention. It's my honor and privilege to introduce today's presenters. First up, you'll be hearing from Dr. Bethany Young-Holt. She is the founder and executive director of CAMI Health and co-founder and director of the Initiative for Multipurpose Prevention Technologies. She's also a principal investigator at the Public Health Institute with over 25 years of experience in global health research and programs. Her work focuses on advancing MPTs. Bethany has been widely published and holds roles at several institutions. Next, you'll be hearing from Dr. Michael Santos. He is the Senior Vice President of Science Partnerships at the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health. He is responsible for a portfolio of programs supporting biomedical innovation to improve health and health equity globally. He also directs the Gene Convene Global Collaboration, an initiative advancing informed decision-making about the development of genetic biocontrol technology for public health. He has served on the Women's Health Innovation Equity Forum since 2024, co-chairing the Partnership Subcommittee and the Innovation Accelerator Working Group. Prior to joining the FNIH in 2019, Dr. Santos was at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he served as a deputy director in the Global Health Division accountable for strategy and operations across the discovery and translational sciences, HIV, and TB programs. His responsibilities included developing investment strategies for emerging priorities, leading the team and processes that supported investment, making, and management, and reporting on team strategy and progress. He was also a strategy advisor on the Strategy, Innovation, and Impact team, developing perspectives on the philosophy of philanthropy. Previously, Dr. Santos was a principal at Boston Consulting Group, where he led projects on malaria, HIV, contraceptive technology, global health regulatory systems, and public radio, and contributed to strategies in the energy and environment, healthcare, industrial goods, consumer and retail sectors, and his first career was in astronomy. He holds a Ph.D. from Caltech and was a research fellow at the University of Cambridge and the Space Telescope Science Institute. Bethany, I'll be handing over to you now. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Claudia, and welcome everyone. For those who might be new to our webinar series and MPTs, I want to just make sure everyone's aware of what MPTs are. So the unmet need in sexual and reproductive health is a major concern globally, affecting communities worldwide, and are often interlinked when we think about unintended pregnancies, which can have significant social and economic consequences for individuals and families globally. And then at the same time, rates of STIs, sexually transmitted infections, are rising globally. And we're seeing antimicrobial resistance increasing, and women are disproportionately burdened with STI sequela. And then despite advances in HIV treatment and prevention, HIV remains a critical public health issue. So MPTs are products that can simultaneously address the multiple health risk, STIs and pregnancy. Condoms are the only existing MPT, and legend has it that it was first introduced around 2,000 years ago in ancient Greece at the encouragement of the wife of King Minos. But women really need more options. So right now, let's look at the history of the initiative for MPTs. It was launched in 2009 as a product-neutral body that aimed to bring together diverse stakeholders and foster an enabling environment for strategic and successful advancement of MPTs. The first mention of MPTs and RFAs was in 2012, and then the first MPT was funded in 2013. And this field has been funded by NIH, USAID, CDC, and it is really exciting to see that now, about 16 years after the launch of this field formally, there are about 22 product candidates in the pipeline. And the initiative is now comprised of over 2,000 multidisciplinary representatives from 24 countries. So now let's take a really brief look at what is in the pipeline. So if we look at what's in the pipeline now, you'll see that there are an array of new MPTs that have entered development, representing diverse delivery approaches and targeted indications, intravaginal rings, gels, fast dissolving inserts, injectables, oral tablets, intrauterine reservoirs. And since the launching of the initiative for MPTs, we have been tracking the pipeline in an online database, and it's aimed to be a resource for MPT stakeholders and product developers. We have just completed our 2025 update, and there are 22 active candidates. If you look at this slide, and it's going to be available on our website, these technologies really are comprised of various targets, including unintended pregnancy, different STIs, and HIV. We've just hosted a webinar a few weeks ago that focused on the dual prevention pill, which you'll see is off the little green box in the far, I guess, right. And the dual prevention pill is the MPT candidate that aims to provide contraception and HIV prevention and is expected to be the first to reach the market. Now, these updates are annual and comprehensive, and as the initiative, we have pretty rigorous inclusion and exclusion criteria. All of the products that we include must have received funding within the past 3 years or findings from recently completed studies in the past 2 years. I do want to acknowledge that there are databases of other groups that monitor areas related to HIV, to MPTs that could be resources for you all too. AVAC, CTI Exchange, and Impact Global Health. Next slide. So to learn more about the products and development, you can visit our website. Next slide. When we take a closer look at the trends in the field over the past decade, or specifically from 2015 to 2025, we've seen some shifts, but in 2015, there were about 26 MPT candidates with active funding. As of now, there are 22. We do on the website have sort of another section of the database that includes archived products. So products that are no longer actively funded, but might be useful to viewers. Next slide. Now, I include this slide here because I think that it might be relevant to what Mike's going to be speaking about. This is from Impact Global Health, and it tracks R&D funding. And this is from their 2025 report that shows that while investments in MPTs and contraception has decreased in recent years, investments in STI R&D has increased, especially those with dual markets. And next slide. But I think, we also want to really keep in mind that the majority of the MPTs that are being developed are in development by academic institutions, small biotech, and nonprofit labs. And these groups are really leading the charge in innovation. The primary supporters or funders for the MPT product candidates are U.S. government funders, notably the NIH, previously USAID. And NIH really plays a pivotal role in backing the early stage product development. But then when we look at the pipeline and sort of the pathway for not just MPTs, but sort of, all sorts of products that you're familiar with, it's really critical to acknowledge that, products do face this proverbial valley of death and needs funding and research to move things forward, to get into the clinic and get licensure, and then move forward. And there are hurdles that these products and their developers face. So with that, I am really excited to welcome Dr. Mike Santos, who will be sharing his expertise and insights on the opportunities to unlock the potential of MPTs through public-private partnerships. Thank you, Mike. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Bethany. Thank you, Claudia, for the introduction, and Cheryl as well on the team for the invitation and the opportunity to join you all today. Hopefully my title slide is up. Okay, thanks, Claudia. Great. So I am Mike Santos. As mentioned, I'm a senior vice president at the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, where I oversee a number of research partnerships. I am talking today about public-private partnerships and how they can advance multipurpose prevention technology. I'm going to be talking about it essentially from the perspective of public-private partnership as a hammer, as a tool that can be used, not like about a specific public-private partnership. But I have great interest in MPTs. I actually started working in this area in 2011 as a consultant with the Gates Foundation, looking at the time at combining HIV prevention and contraceptive technologies. And when I was at the Gates Foundation, I had the opportunity to work on it a little bit as well. So this is a particular topic that has a very fond place in my heart. I'm delighted to be chatting about it. Yeah, and I guess the other thing I wanted to mention is just to credit that this talk is adapted from a presentation I gave at the MPT meeting in July of last summer. So thanks also to the organizers of that. So just quickly about the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, where I work. So we are an independent nonprofit organization created by law in the US to support the mission of the National Institutes of Health. We do that in various different ways, but the main way that we do that is by facilitating public-private partnerships in biomedical R&D. This slide just is indicative of the kind of big tent of different partners that we work with. Of course, the NIH, the FDA, other government agencies, both US and outside of the US, and then, of course, many different companies, academic organizations, foundations, both philanthropic foundations, but also like disease advocacy foundations, community organizations. It's of course essential to bring what all of these different kinds of stakeholders have together in order to build effective R&D partnerships. One thing on the name public-private partnership. So private is a stand-in there for very many different things. Includes both sort of profit-motivated organizations as well as private mission-motivated organizations like philanthropic or advocacy organizations. And I think actually kind of more than public-private, the concept of a PPP is really about bringing together organizations that represent different kinds of motivations, recognizing that within organizations there are multiple different kinds of motivations as well. But especially the ability to bring together sort of profit motive with mission motive in a productive collaboration, I would say, is one of the kind of conceptual hallmarks. And I am going to really here focus more on the principles of public-private partnerships, not like the specific mechanisms that FNIH uses with NIH and other government agencies. If people are interested in that, we can talk about that as well. So a really important question is when PPP is actually a good idea. So there are some criteria here on the left and then some questions to kind of guide us as we think about this specifically for MPTs, and we'll come back to it at the end. So certainly you need different stakeholders to share a common goal. And then there has to be some kind of public good that is created. So public good meaning something everyone can use, like generation of knowledge, for example. And then you need stakeholders that are interested in this, that have an incentive or want this to exist, but that lack sufficient resources or incentives on their own to do it. But when you pool them together, they have sufficient resources. And resources here, of course, refers to financial resources, but also things like the necessary authority, like that regulatory organizations have, and then also sometimes kind of reputational or legitimacy resources. Sometimes there are opportunities when organizations are in a larger collective, say to define a regulatory pathway in a way that just like a individual product developer and a regulatory agency together wouldn't be able to pursue themselves. So then the kinds of questions that we ask, that we all should ask, so given the landscape of existing activities, what's the set of unmet needs, which is generally going to be pretty large, unfortunately. And then of those, what are a good fit for partnership? What potentially meet those criteria? Of those, what are the required resources that you would need for a partnership? And then ultimately, you're trying to understand well, I guess not just the appetite, what is the capacity of stakeholders to contribute? And then beyond that, what is the appetite of stakeholders to contribute? And, if you can work your way through all of that, then you can reach the point where you can begin the more tactical and specific work of designing the partnership. So as I mentioned, at the Foundation for the NIH, we work on a lot of different public-private partnerships in biomedical R&D. And I should have said, public-private partnership could mean very many different things. A government agency giving a grant to a private university is a form of public-private partnership. But here we're really talking about multi-partner public-private partnership. And so in those settings, often the partnerships focus in what are deemed to be non-competitive areas. Certainly when there are multiple profit-motivated partners involved, that is one of the common outcomes. But this still has a really wide range of areas that the partnership could be focused on, of the different kinds of public goods that the partnership could be designed to produce. So that could include, say, target identification. Generally, product discovery and development is a more competitive space, but when you're far enough upstream in something like target identification, we have examples of collaboration and partnership. Things like sample and data repositories to kind of open up kind of more enabling understanding of, say, the underlying biology of something that a group of partners are interested in. Certainly the development of biomarkers and other product development tools. And I think a lot of times people probably think of that in terms of efficacy biomarkers and things like surrogate endpoints for clinical trials, which certainly there are lots of examples of. But we also have some programs that work in safety biomarkers. That's another, of course, potentially enabling tool for a field. Regulatory pathways is a big one. For example, right now we have a big program on gene therapy, and particularly bespoke gene therapy. Gene therapy is designed for very small patient populations where there's a great interest in developing a standardized regulatory playbook for the many different organizations that are pursuing that. So it doesn't need to be replicated each time. Things like methods and standards, for example, say like digital measures of movements that could be applied for many different movement disorders, things like Parkinson's disease. Non-clinical models, maybe developing immunoassay platform that's, broadly useful across different areas. And then platform clinical trials. So platform clinical trials that have the capacity to bring in multiple different interventions to them over time, with, for example, a common control. So a way potentially of comparing to each other, but also just of saving resources when evaluating multiple different interventions. So when we're thinking about MPTs, this is also maybe a little bit of an idea starter to think about how these different ideas interface with those questions on the previous slide in the MPT landscape for where there might be promising public-private partnership opportunity. And then just kind of talking generically about the structure of a PPP, you generally have some mix of funding partners that are also playing a governance role, as well as potentially other partners that may not be directly funding, but are involved in the governance, governance meaning setting the direction of the partnership, making key decisions about it, monitoring its progress. So, of course, you can have industry and other kinds of investors. You can have philanthropic organizations, both commonly funding the partnership, but also community and patient advocacy organizations, for example, that may be participating in the governance, may in some cases be contributing financially, but contributing other really important input into the R&D partnership, and of course the potential for the results of the partnership to be taken up eventually. And then, of course, the public side of public-private partnership government, which may be contributing money directly, maybe making, say, using existing mechanisms like grants that are going out in parallel to the partnership. Also, say in the case of NIH, can have intramural research that's involved. And so then, some sort of central partner management body, which, can be small or big, depending on the partnership. And then the partners that are actually doing the work, which can certainly have overlap with the funding or governance partners, but usually will also involve additional partners from academia, from industry beyond the industry that's funding, nonprofit research organizations, and then, of course, as we said, grantees or intramural programs for public funders. There is a sort of standard joke when you've seen one public-private partnership, you've seen one public-private partnership. So this is a very generic structure. Obviously, there's a lot of variation that could show up in any individual partnership, but this is a kind of overall landscape of how a lot of them look when you abstract them out. And I did want to give one example. So this is a partnership designed to improve our prediction of early onset preeclampsia. So hypertension during pregnancy that can lead to adverse outcomes for the fetus and for the mother, for the pregnant person. So that's the goal here is to do a better job of identifying pregnancies at higher risk for preeclampsia. And the primary approach here is to test and improve biomarkers that are already in use in Europe, but that are not in use in the US or more broadly globally. And then, of course, the impact on health. So that approach involves companies. There are companies that have marketed products in Europe that have an interest in having their market expanded if the biomarkers that are in use could be validated in more diverse populations than the European populations that they're currently marketed for. So they have an interest in this public good of broader validation of the biomarkers, and for that matter, improvement of the biomarkers that are in use. Then you have organizations like the Preeclampsia Foundation, Merck from others, and the Gates Foundation that have an interest in this same public good and this validation of these biomarkers because they would like to expand the predictive tools that are available globally for preeclampsia that could then expand access to management of the condition. And you have a number of academic partners that are part of performing the analyses, and you have NICHD within the NIH, which is a really key partner in multiple ways, including that they are providing the data sets that are being used to do this validation and improvement study. So this is a great example of partners from across that landscape of that I showed earlier that have a common goal, that have agreed on a public good that they can all get behind, and that have collectively sufficient resources, even though individually they didn't. You could say, oh, by the way, Revity comes from PerkinElmer, it might be a more familiar name. So you have a couple of companies that you would say, well, already had this interest, but didn't have enough of this interest and enough of these resources to do this work on their own. So this is an example of a partnership enabling something to happen that wasn't otherwise going to happen through a collaborative among arguably a sort of disparate set of partners that you see on the slide, and is a good model for many similar kinds of efforts and hopefully what could be done further with MPTs. I won't spend much time on this, just the general process. We're talking here about how you kind of explore these ideas. Like I said, once you land on the points of alignment, then you need to get into the design of the concept. You need to get more specific, and ultimately, planning and costing and fundraising, and if that's successful, launching. The timeline for all this happening certainly varies pretty dramatically depending on the scale and depending on the motivation of the partners involved and the resources that are already lined up or not. The scale of partnerships that FNIH is involved in is often between like $5 and $100 million over 3 to 5 years. Of course, there's lots of different possible variations on all of that. And then where I wanted to end, of course, is before we get into the discussion on these topics, is bringing it back to MPTs, right? So, I think in the discussion time in this meeting, as we think about how public-private partnerships might be able to advance MPT development, we ought to be thinking about who are the stakeholders with common goals. Of course, you think about funders and product developers, but you think about other stakeholders as well. And one of the things that I think Bethany alluded to, that of course is part of the thinking, is that these wouldn't necessarily just be stakeholders with an interest in MPTs. It could be stakeholders certainly with an interest in any of the single indication product developments that goes into MPTs are relevant stakeholders. But you could think even more broadly, if you're thinking about like enabling regulatory pathways for novel drug device combinations, then there might be some oncology stakeholders or even fields like hypertension, drug infused stents and things like that. I mean, there may be other areas, other stakeholders outside of the MPT community and its sort of constituent communities that could have a sort of common cause around particular uh, a particular public good of interest. Yeah, so of course the next point is getting to that, what's the specific gap, and then what's the corresponding public good solution that the stakeholders can agree on. And again, maybe they could even have identified different gaps from their perspective, but have a common cause around the public good solution that addresses them. Um, and then the really hard part, unfortunately, harder than the first two bullet points, is figuring out where you can find a match between the resources that are needed to develop that public good solution and the resources that are available or can be made available of the aligned stakeholders. So of course that's usually the biggest bridge to get biggest gulf to bridge. Yeah, and so then just some starter ideas for conversation around MPTs specifically. Of course, regulatory guidance on development pathways is something that comes up pretty frequently. Um, can also think about things like community demand, product preferences, value proposition research and analysis. So not product development per se, but important inputs into motivating investment in product development and guiding product development. Or you can go to the other end of the spectrum. You can go to actually the beginning of drug discovery and say look at target identification for say broad spectrum STI prevention. And then could think about, are there platforms either in the preclinical space or in the clinical space where there could be productive partnership, essentially around saving resources by doing something in common across the field. And I hope people will have additional ideas beyond these. I guess one of the things that characterizes these, and that I think is a particular challenge in the MPT space, is there's just tremendous diversity. I mean, there's not even one indication that's shared in common across all MPT research, right? Since there are, different possible combinations of contraception and HIV and other STI prevention, and there's not even any one of those that is in every MPT approach. So, the places where partnership is this kind of multi-partner or public-private partnership is usually going to have the best opportunity are places where you can find, sufficient common cause among enough different organizations. So when you look at the field, you want to look maybe either for areas of convergence within the field, or like I said, areas of convergence between like some subsets of the field and some other potentially bigger and better resourced field, where again, even if the specific gaps that people are trying to bridge are different, where there's some common cause around the solution. So there are a couple of ways to try to search the space more of possible ideas to find ones that may be more promising. Maybe I'll come back and leave this slide up, but before I do that, well, first of all, I want to again thank the IMPT team for the opportunity to speak today. Also, certainly at FNIH, we're very interested in this space. We'd be delighted to hear more ideas. Of course, we hope right now, but also afterwards. My colleague Renata Hofstetter is also on the call. Our emails are here. I'm sure they can be made available. So again, really appreciate the opportunity. Looking forward to the discussion. Well, and I'll take the slides down for now, but if we want to refer back to any of them, I'll be happy to do that too. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. That was so interesting and spot on what we were hoping you would talk to us about as we're trying to think about moving the MPT field forward, and getting these early stage products into the market and hands of people who need them. So right now we're going to open this up to discussion. So we just ask that when you're not speaking, to just put yourself on mute. You can raise your hand. We also, really like to foster community engagement in these webinars. So, you can, put your face on the screen and speak directly. So, yes, does anyone have any questions? Otherwise, I have a question I can start with, but I'd love to have other people jump it in. I also want to just point out that one of your comments, Mike, made me think of, sorry, I have a typo in there. I just posted in chat an announcement that Lee Allen shared with us earlier this week about different potential partners in the contraceptive and MPT field when we're thinking about different indications and potential benefits of contraception. So that might be interesting for people to look at. So any questions from anyone that you want to start with?
Yes, I see Greg has a question, so the floor is yours.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. Thank you very much. I posted in the chat, but my question is, do you have any examples that you can share with us of how intellectual property is handled going into a public-private partnership? One partner has IP going into it, and on the other side, how is IP handled when it's generated during the public-private partnership?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Greg. So one of the common principles that I mentioned is that a lot of public-private partnerships try to produce public goods that are in relatively non-competitive spaces. So having said that, there still may be there still will be a governance discussion about what is produced within the partnership and how it is made available both within the partnership and beyond the partnership eventually. Like as a general rule within FNIH, we are looking for things that are eventually going to be available to everyone, but there are certainly times where like partnership members have access to information earlier than people outside the partnership do. Mostly our partnerships are somewhat deliberately trying to avoid generating IP within the partnership, although that's not like a structural constraint. It is more a constraint of it. It is easier in many of these situations to construct something where that's not true. In terms of protecting intellectual property coming into the partnership, yeah, I mean, certainly that's something that partners are interested in. And so if there is, in some sense, individual partner intellectual property that's going to be visible to other, I mean, a lot of partners are going to be bringing intellectual property, but that won't necessarily be sort of transparent or kind of, I don't know, at risk as part of the partnership. But if, in fact, less like IP, well, not like patented, but more like proprietary information that people wouldn't want to share, certainly some partnerships have a lot of effort put into governance in terms of confidentiality and non-disclosure that enables partners to share things within the partnership that would not be shared outside the partnership. Those are also, I mean, we were involved in one of those. I think took like 18 months to negotiate. So, it definitely ups the degree of difficulty when you're in that kind of situation, but it's not an insurmountable obstacle. But it's sort of case by case is probably the really short answer to your question, but try to give a little more color beyond that to how it actually gets handled in practice.
Great. Thank you, Michael.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I have a couple. Um, so Mike, I mean, this is something I've been thinking about a lot. And what do you think are the biggest barriers for industry getting involved in a PPP? Is it, regulatory uncertainty, limited market? Like, what do you think they need to get more engaged? And then I see Lee has a question.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. So, when I was talking about how how we think about this anyway, right? It's like, okay, well, you want stakeholders that have a common goal that are committed to achieving something, but then there's some gap that is inhibiting that, or that they really want to be, they're really excited about it. You know, we would we would love to invest in therapeutics for this disease area, but right now the clinical trials would take 20 years to complete, and we just cannot successfully make the investment case for something like that. So, we need some biomarker enabled way of shortening that timeline, and if that could be achieved, then we would be in the game. So, you do have these situations where you of course really want people who already really want to do something and then but there's something holding them back, and you can get some specificity around what it is that's holding them back. And in our case, the thing that's holding them back is some like R&D addressable, you know uh topic. It's something related to the R&D process. So I feel like, your question sort of further widens into, well, why are people interested or not to begin with? And what would be enabling, because there are lots of people who in industry that I'm sure would think like, oh yeah, this would be great to get involved in. Um, but it's not, uh, it doesn't meet the set of criteria for prioritization within the internal R&D programs of those organizations. I mean, it does for some and not for others. And how could you get it to meet it for more? And so I certainly, just empirically, of course, places where there are reliably large financial markets are places that attract a lot of investment. So, you know, if there were market shaping activities that made the demand and the financial opportunity clearer, that's generally a way of motivating further investment. Um, as you said, I mean, some of that could be more on the like high resource setting payer landscape, um, for example. Uh, so I think it's definitely, as a field, worth, yeah, thinking more broadly. How do you bring more people into the circle that are motivated to try to do this? And then those people will also help with identifying, well, I would be in this space, but for hopefully a kind of small, discrete number of things. If it's, I would be in this space, but for like a really long list of things, then obviously that's going to be tougher to successfully address. Yeah, and I think probably lots of people on this call have further thoughts on that question too. So hopefully other people would chime in too.
Thanks a lot. Lee?
Hi, Mike. This may have been what Bethany was getting at, but I feel like a lot of what we've heard is that pharma kind of doesn't want to stick their foot in it until they know that there's demand in the U.S. And thinking about a recent uptick of STIs in the U.S. and things like that, um, could a public-private partnership look like many different seemingly interested parties like going in to do a US market research project? I think that's one of the things you mentioned, but I just wanted to ask it more pointedly.
Yeah. I mean, I think it could, right? Because um, it certainly could. You can imagine a world where there are, let's say, companies that like think it's reasonably likely that there's a market there, but aren't totally sold. And they have enough other priorities that figuring out the answer to that question is not high enough on their list. But if you told them, well, we have some mission motivated funders that are going to cover half the cost, and then there are, you know, five other partners that are also going to cover 10% of the cost each. Could you cover 10%? or sorry, 4 other partners, could you cover 10% as well? Um, you know, now that investment for them is 1/10 of the price of answering the question. And certainly in our experience, well, you find a lot of people who are willing to pay 1/10 of the price that are not willing to pay the whole price. They have to still be willing to pay 1/10 of the price. So, if they're only willing to pay 1/1000th of the price, then you're not going to get them involved. So it takes them believing that there is probably something enough there that they're willing to be part of it. Of course, if they thought it was really, really good, well, they would just pay 100% of the price. So we know empirically that that's not where they're at right now. But then you have to figure out, are they at like 10% of the price or like 1/1000th of the price? And that's that sort of like last bit of, well, yeah, they would like the answer to the question, but are they sufficiently invested that they would really want to participate in it? And you do have some situations where, I mean, I used to work at the Gates Foundation. You have some situations where you just are going to get 0% of it out of profit motivated partners. And the only way it moves forward is with mission motivated funding. And the whole goal is eventually to raise their interest so that in the future they're willing to pay 10% of something. So that, that's certainly another possibility. I mean, one of the things I do in my job is, Gates Foundation and NIH collaboration that sometimes has private sector partners, but sometimes it's not. So, or mission motivated partners, or profit motivated partners, and sometimes it's not. So, yeah, I mean, but I do think it's at least like it meets the criteria of something that could be explored, and then whether it ultimately meets the criteria of something that's viable is a question that would need to be answered.
All right, so I'm going to piggyback on Lee's question again, because it is something that I was trying to get at, is we learned a lot from the USAID matrix study in terms of sort of what investors are looking for, what potential corporate partners are looking for sort of supporting the MPT field and also HIV prevention. And, one of the things that really came out was the need for a US-based or European-based market study. Do you think that would be a low-hanging fruit sort of type of study to motivate sort of to incentivize sort of a launching of a public-private partnership, or are there other things?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it has attractive features from a PPP perspective, assuming the partners can generally get on board with the idea that this research is going to, well, in many cases, you would probably want the research to be made openly available beyond even the members of the partnership. You could debate and discuss that and whether there's like a proprietary period before it becomes more widely available. Almost always there's like an inadvertently proprietary period where the parties that are involved know more than other people do. But that would be assuming that companies sort of agreed, like, yeah, that's okay with us to pay into something that is not uniquely ours in exchange for the fact that we're only paying a small percentage of the total price. But it has the general kinds of features, like it's a convergent interest. It's potentially interested to many different parties. Like you could be pursuing totally different products, like device versus drug versus but you would still have a common interest in this. So that's an attractive feature of that potentially. I mean, you still have to say market for what. So you'd still get into a little bit of that, but it has the kind of, I mean, it has many of the kinds of features that I think like can meet those criteria. And then, like I said, it's just a question of how close it is to the tipping point. Like, is it, which that's the sort of question. I maybe I should have mentioned this before. Like in FNIH's experience, we have public-private partnerships where the money is 100% profit motivated partner money. The public partners are important for the governance of it, but the money is 100% private. So that represents situations where like the interest is very high it's still not high enough for them to do it by themselves, but it's so high that you can just split it 6 ways among industry and get the money in. Then it's a lot more common that you have, or for many projects, you also have a mission motivated investor like the NIH or other government agencies that is subsidizing the rest of the investment. And like I said, then you have some situations where the mission motivated investors are 100% of it. So, you have this kind of sliding scale of interest in terms of the percentage of public and other mission motivated funder subsidy that you have. And that's like an empirical question for every partnership of where you're at in that balance, with like profit motivated partners like industry companies. So, and again, not to say that they don't also have mission motivation, they for sure do, but they also have profit motivation that is a substantial part of their calculus. So I think like in principle, yes, it meets the criteria, but in practice, where are you at in that balance of kind of profit motivated incentive versus needing public and other mission motivated subsidy? That's like an empirical question that requires talking with partners, and and then maybe depends on what is produced. I mean, part of the again, we're talking about things generally that are publicly available at the end of the day. So you can say, why would anyone pay for it? I can just free ride off of everyone else who pays for it and use it when it's done. But one of the strong incentives usually is the opportunity to participate in the design and shaping it, is the opportunity to say, well, if you're doing this market research, the market questions that are most important to me, or the way in which I want this information communicated that is most ingestible and valuable to me, are these ways. So if I get involved in this, I have the opportunity to shape it so that the output will be more useful to me than it might have been if I just let other people shape it and I use whatever comes out at the end. So it's also valuable, or it's also a sort of good thing, so to speak, for the partnership concept if it's something that there's like an incentive to be part of shaping, because that gives you extra reason to want to, like I said, actually kind of be involved and not just like free ride and say, I'll read the report when it comes out in 18 months.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, we are getting to the end of the hour. I want to make sure, Claudia, do you see any more questions? I'm not, but are there any other questions, comments from anyone?
I don't see any in the chat now, Bethany.
Okay. So do you think the private sector can help sort of to follow up with that on demand generation, Mike? And what role would that be?
Well, I mean, I think yes, for sure, at the point where, I mean, they're producing products. I mean, right, like if you have an industry organization that is like producing a product and now is marketing that product, that, I mean, certainly for bigger companies, generating demand for their products is a core competency through their marketing and sales and medical affairs and those units. So so yes, absolutely. If they can reach the point where they are sufficiently invested in product development and that product development is sufficiently far along that they think that they want to be market shaping for the entry of their product into the market, it's not so clear to me that they would have much interest in that if they were either not involved in R&D or if their R&D was like relatively nascent such that the like probability of success and the timeline was kind of far away. So I think, and of course it's resource dependent and kind of pricing dependent. If you have an innovator product at a high price point, under exclusivity, marketing exclusivity in a market, then the interest of that organization in generating demand for their product is a lot higher than for a genericized, type margin, just taking a share out of some pre-existing market or something like that, probably. So So I think for sure there can be, but probably there's a kind of specific set of circumstances under which that becomes a lever, is my guess. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
speculating.
great. Thank you. Claudia, I'll hand it back over to you.
I just want to really say thank you, Mike. That was such an informative presentation. I think it's given a lot of us clarity, and we appreciate the time you've set aside to talk to us. It was lovely having you here. I also want to thank Bethany, and I want to give a heartfelt thanks to the NICHD for their generous support, else this would not be possible. I also just want to quickly remind you, for those of you joining us for the first time, to please stay connected. You can go to www.impt.org. That way you can stay in the loop for any future events, webinars, etc. We loved having you here, and we hope that you have a wonderful day or evening wherever you are. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.